Okay, so now that we have our two inputs from the user, which is called fnum and snum, we need to pass both of these variables into our methods, which we call the adder and the mplier. But first, let's delete this, which was from the previous tutorial, so you won't get confused. Okay, so to call out these methods, right, we need to create the objects. How do we create the object? Well, this line does it. We use the math operation, which is the class we want access from, and then we create our variable name, which we call math object. Now that you have your reference variable from the math operation class, you could go ahead and use this reference variable with the dot separator to access the methods inside this class. Basically, we have two methods inside the math operation class, which we call the adder and the multiplier. Okay, so here we use the adder, and here we're calling out the multiplier. Now we need to pass in those two variables. So how do you pass in those two variables? You just put fnum, which is the variable name, separated by a comma for every variable you insert. So snum. So if you have another variable, you could go ahead put third, num, and fourth num, and so forth. But here we only have two numbers from the user. Same case for this guy here. Okay, now if you hover over the method name, it'll give you an error as follow. The complaint is for the argument. Basically it's saying, hey, your original method, which is called the adder and the mplier, did not have anything inside the parenthesis. Inside the parenthesis are what we call arguments, as shown here, right here. Okay, so it's saying that, hey, your original method did not have any arguments inside, so how come you're passing in arguments and stuff? You have to let me know in advance. So we have to basically let it know in advance. To do that, put the data type int first num followed by int second snum. Once we pass in these arguments, it'll be called fnum and snum. What we want to do next is set it equal to our two variables up here. So we need to do this, is set it equal to fnum semicolon. The other guy is second number. So first num is equal to fnum, second num is equal to snum. Now I want to print out the summation of first num with the second num. For this method, same thing. We gotta put fnum comma int snum. Then we gotta set these two arguments to the variables we created up here. So to do that, same thing. First num is equal to fnum, second num is equal to snum. So the first thing you notice is that the errors are no longer there because we modify our methods to take in two arguments. In this case, take in two integers, which we call fnum and snum. That's why in the math tester class, inside this main method, it's perfectly fine now to pass in two arguments that are integers, as shown here. I'm gonna run this and to show you the result. First num, let's put 15. Second num, I'm probably gonna put 4. Okay, the answer, the sum is 19, and the multiplier, which gives you 15 times 4, 60, as we expected it. So now I'm gonna recap everything just to close out this whole program. Now to summarize, we created a math tester class to access all the variables and methods inside this math operation class. We have a main method inside this math tester class. Starting with the very first line, we created the scanner object, and we use a reference variable of the type scanner to hold this scanner object. So now that we have this reference variable, we could access the methods inside the scanner class. But before that, we prompt the user which is this line, we tell them enter the first value, and after prompting the user for the first value, we allow the user to enter the value. The value in this case that the user will enter is an integer. That's why we use the scan object dot nextInt, which is a method inside the scanner class that allows the user to enter integers or whole numbers. Okay, and after this enter, we store it to a variable, which is an integer called fnum. Now after this line, we prompt the user for the second num and do the same thing, scan object dot nextInt. This will allow the user to enter the second value. The second value the user enters, we store that into our integer variable we call snum. Okay, now that we have stored the two inputs from the user into fnum and snum, we want these variables to be processed by our methods, which we call the adder and the empire. However, both of these methods are from different class. We needed to create a object of that class, and basically this line of code does that math operation, and then we call our reference variable math object. Now we have our reference variable, we could access the methods inside this math operation class. So to do that again, dot the adder, which is the method name, then we pass in the two arguments, which we called fnum and snum. Remember, both of these were from the user input here. Okay, so both of those arguments gets passed in these methods, and then we made modification to these methods that allows two inputs, and we did this int fnum and then comma int snum, and then we set these two here, fnum and snum, into our declare variable, which we call first num and second num. After we have set them equal to each other, we print out the summation of these two. Same thing as with this case here, but multiplication instead. So hopefully you understand that this is just a brief intro into methods. So just stay tuned. I promise I'll throw more tutorials at you that will help you understand it much better. So ladies and gentlemen, this concludes my tutorial. One thing I ask from you is a favor, that is to subscribe to my channel. I would greatly appreciate it. I don't get paid for these tutorials from YouTube or whatever. I just like to do it just to help out others. I hope you find it useful so I could continue making them. So see you in the next tutorial. Bye.